The sky over Berlin was a vast, empty canvas, the kind that made you feel small just looking at it. Below, the city stretched out like a broken puzzle. Streets that once hummed with life were now just skeletal remains, their buildings gutted and hollow. The war had chewed through Berlin and spat out what was left. 48,000 buildings gone. Another 23,000 barely clinging on. The grand boulevards, the bustling squares, the proud facades, all of it reduced to rubble and dust. It was a city that had been stripped down to its bones, a shadow of what it once was. And yet beneath the wreckage, something stubborn still pulsed. Life, maybe, or just the memory of it. The Soviet Union had suffered 27 million casualties in the Great Patriotic War. That's more than any other nation in history. Entire generations were wiped out, families shattered, cities reduced to rubble. The pain was immeasurable, the scars deep. But through it all, they endured. Their victory came at a tremendous cost, one that would echo through the decades. The soldiers who marched home carried the weight of what they had seen, what they had lost. And the nation itself would never be the same. The war had changed everything. British Air Force Marshal Arthur Tadar once said, "Berlin is completely destroyed. It is beyond rebuilding." Those words painted a picture of utter devastation, a city reduced to rubble with no hope of recovery. But was it really beyond saving? The ruins told one story, but the people who walked those broken streets had another. They saw not just destruction, but the stubborn beginnings of something new. The question lingered. Could a city that had been shattered ever truly rise again? And if it did, what would it become? The streets of Berlin were quiet now, but not empty. Women moved through the rubble, their faces set with a kind of quiet determination. Some carried children on their hips. Others held the hands of little ones who stumbled over broken bricks. The men who had once filled these streets were gone, lost to the war, to prison camps, to time. The city had been reshaped, not just by bombs and battles, but by absence. Mothers, daughters, sisters, they were the ones left to pick up the pieces. The children, wide-eyed and curious, didn't know the Berlin that had been. They only knew this one, where the women held everything together. The war had changed more than buildings. It had changed who was left to rebuild. The Red Army pushed forward through the shattered streets of Berlin, their boots crunching over rubble and broken glass. Every building, every corner was a fight. Soldiers fell, but they kept moving, driven by the weight of years of war. The Reichstag loomed ahead, a symbol of Nazi power, now scarred by artillery and smoke. Soviet troops stormed the doors, their voices raw with exhaustion and fury. Inside, the last defenders were overwhelmed, room by room, floor by floor. The cost was terrible, thousands lost, but the prize was within reach. When the red flag was finally raised over the Reichstag, it marked the end of Hitler's reign. The battle for Berlin had been brutal, one of the bloodiest in history, but the heart of the Third Reich was theirs. The streets of Berlin were more than just rubble and ruins. They were a graveyard of memories, a place where hope had been buried under the weight of war. Ruth Andreas Friedrich walked these streets, her notebook in hand, but it wasn't the crumbling buildings that haunted her. It was the silence, the kind of silence that settles in when people have lost too much to speak. She wrote about it later, how the Soviet occupation didn't just break the city's bones, it shattered its spirit. The people moved like shadows, their eyes hollow, their voices barely above a whisper. They had survived, but survival wasn't living. It was just waiting, wondering if the pain would ever really end. Berlin wasn't just a city anymore, it was a wound, raw and open, and no one knew how to heal it. The Kaiser Hotel on Wilhelmsplatz wasn't just another building in Munich. It was where history took a dark turn. Back in the early 1920s, this place buzzed with the energy of a movement that would change everything. Hitler and his followers gathered here, plotting and planning, turning ideas into action. The walls of that hotel saw the birth of something monstrous, a regime that would leave its mark on the world. It wasn't just bricks and mortar, it was the starting point of a nightmare. And even though time has moved on, the shadow of what began there still lingers. The Berlin Sports Palace stood as a towering symbol of power, its grand halls echoing with the weight of history. This was the place where Hitler took the stage, his voice booming through the cavernous space, as he laid out the twisted visions of the Nazi regime. Crowds gathered here, swept up in the fervor of propaganda, their cheers and chants filling the air like a dark tide. It wasn't just a building. It was a machine for shaping minds, a place where words became weapons and ideology took hold. The speeches delivered within these walls weren't just announcements. They were declarations of war on truth itself. And for years, the sports palace stood as a monument to the lies that fueled a nation's descent into madness. The Reich Chancellery stood in shattered silence, its once grand halls now a skeletal ruin. The heavy bombing raid in February 1945 had left deep scars, reducing the heart of Nazi power to rubble and twisted steel. What was once a symbol of Hitler's dominance now lay broken, a hollow shell of its former self. The walls, cracked and blackened, bore the weight of defeat. The floors, littered with debris, told a story of destruction. This was no longer a seat of power. It was a graveyard of ambition. The Third Reich's dreams of conquest had crumbled along with its walls. The streets of Berlin were lined with bold red posters, Stalin's words stamped across them like commands. The people who cast the votes decide nothing. The people who count the votes decide everything. The city was learning new rules now, and the old ones didn't matter much anymore. Over by the Olympic swimming stadium, the water was clear again, the lanes marked, the diving boards steady. Soviet soldiers lounged on the bleachers, their uniforms rolled up as they kicked back in the sun. Some splashed in the pool, laughing, while others smoked and watched. It wasn't about competition anymore, just a place to cool off, to forget for a little while. Berlin wasn't the same. The buildings still stood, but the air was different. The posters, the soldiers, the way people moved a little slower, a little more careful. It was all part of the change. The war was
Thank
over,
you.
but
It
the
looks
city
like
was still
Pearl's hand
figuring
is
out
up
what came
again.
next. The Soviet occupation of Berlin left scars that ran deep, reshaping the city in ways that echoed for decades. When the Red Army rolled in at the end of World War II, they brought with them a new order, one marked by strict control, ideological repression, and a divide that would eventually split the city in two. The Soviets dismantled industries, relocated resources, and imposed their political will, leaving Berliners to navigate a landscape of shortages and surveillance. But the impact wasn't just economic or political, it was personal. Families were torn apart, neighbors turned on each other, and a once vibrant cultural hub was forced into silence. The occupation set the stage for the Cold War, turning Berlin into a battleground of ideologies. Even after the Soviets left, their shadow lingered, seen in the walls that went up, the freedoms that were lost, and the generations who grew up knowing only division. Yet, Berlin endured. The city's resilience became its defining trait, a testament to the people who refused to let their spirit be crushed. The Soviet occupation may have shaped Berlin's past, but it also forged its identity, a place where history's weight is felt, but never allowed to dictate the future.